All right. So, Krista, I'll have you start with introducing yourself.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Christa Welch. I am a licensed clinical social worker, therapist, and owner of a therapy practice and women's center here in Annapolis, Maryland called Betty Center. And tonight I'm going to be talking about some parent strategies to support you during your summer technology experiences with your kiddos. Looking forward to it.
And my name is Erin Merli. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner at Annapolis Pediatrics and behavioral health specialist. I'm going to be taking you through kind of the mostly the bad and the ugly, but some of the good with technology. I am also the parent of two teenagers, so none of you are alone. We have been navigating technology in our lives since well before the pandemic. Um, Luckily, before the pandemic, my kids were fairly young, so we had less negotiating. And then since then, it's been a fairly regular source of conversation in my household. So as we present this information, this is meant to be supportive and informative. Just know that we are right there with you with any potential struggles that you may experience. So, and this is part of our ongoing series of talks from behavioral health experts in the community about different parenting topics and child development topics. These talks are monthly and they are also recorded and, as Katie said, put on both the Betty Center website as well as Annapolis Pediatrics. So again, we're going to be talking about kids and technology, navigating digital childhood and raising connected, grounded humans. Next slide, please. All right, so screens down, summer up. So why are we talking about this right now? Well, first of all, as a pediatric provider, any time is an important time to talk about and reevaluate screen time. It wasn't something that we had to think a whole lot about as, you know, when most of us were kids. And so the data about developing brains technology is constantly evolving, right? So it's important that we as parents continue to stay up to date with the current research and information about developing brains and all aspects of it. But it's also important that we continue to talk with our kids in an age appropriate way about why we limit, right? Like our grandparents used to say everything in moderation. Well, the same thing is true with screens, right? It's not about never, ever, ever. It's about being mindful about screens. But specifically in summer, obviously there's typically fewer routines, which equals a screen time spike. What we know pre-pandemic, average daily use of electronics was somewhere around 3.8 hours. And then during the pandemic, it doubled. And most of us have really struggled to get back to any sort of pre-pandemic average screen time usage. And the concerning part is that we're starting to see more and more kids really struggle with the effects of unlimited or unregulated screen time. So really our goal, like I said, is not to shame, but really to empower all of us with practical, sustainable strategies that we may be able to take to our families. Next slide. So what do we define as screen time? Really, I think about it as any visual device that you have to plug into a wall that requires a battery source. Now, there is a difference between how we use technology, right? So for an example, passive use is kind of what we're going to be focusing on for a lot of this talk. And that's really kind of the scrolling and the watching and not the type that is, more educational or knowledge-based or video calls with grandma or creating some new art technique using technology. We're talking about the more passive screen time use. And the how of what we use the screens for is just as important as the how long, right? And we really want to think about, as we're going through this talk, it's not always about the screen. It's about what's being displaced in a child's development through that screen time. Next slide. So when we talk about, on the next slide, you're going to see really what the AAP recommends is guidelines at different ages. Under 18 months, really limiting screen time to just maybe video chatting with grandma or a relative or something like that. And then really through the age of 2, very small increments of high quality programming. And we'll define that a little bit as we go on. It increases a little bit over the age of 2. And here's why. What we know about the brain and development is that the brain develops from the bottom up. And what I mean by that, if you can kind of visualize my hand as the brain, right? This is the brainstem, which is, it controls a lot of the movement of the body based on what the brain is telling it to, right? But it's fairly primitive. And then we have the midbrain that houses the amygdala and the hippocampus. And that's kind of our fight or flight responses. And that's pretty much in charge in young kids, right? That's why one of the reasons they have more temper tantrums and things like that, right? The fingers are forming the prefrontal cortex, and that's really the rapidly developing part of the brain in childhood and adolescence and through most of young adulthood until about age 24. And this is the part of the brain that's responsible for impulse control and decision making. And until it's really solidified with the rest of the brain, we can often easily be overrun with emotions, right? I call that blowing our top, right? So no longer is the prefrontal cortex thinking and planning and executing. Instead, we're just feeling and acting, right? That amygdala and hippocampus is taking over. So this is the connection that we're really working on, that emotional regulation piece in childhood and adolescence. And that's why, we'll talk a little bit more about this, why family media plans are important as we move forward. Because limiting screen time and also offering mitigating strategies for any of the negative influences that screen time has on developing brains. And here's the thing that's so incredibly important and really exciting about the brain. Yes, it's highly sensitive at younger ages and it's rapidly developing, but it's also very plastic. Right? There is nothing that we've done up to this point that is, irreversible, right? So the brain constantly changes and those synaptic connections reform based on experiences. So we also talk about summer as being a time to kind of reset. What do we want our fall to look like? Next slide, please. So when we're talking about the research, so I told you we're going to go through the good, the bad, the ugly. I'm going to start with the ugly and the bad first, and then we'll kind of circle back to the good. But I want it to remain in everybody's brain that because of this neuroplasticity, nothing is irreversible, right? There's plenty of things that we can mitigate and change, right? As we know more, we do more. So the way that these cortical connections are being formed in kids, specifically from birth and through about the age of 7, is through sensory input, through movement, through relational interactions, through cause and effect. And what that means for this early age group is that kids need to touch and climb and run and fall and fail and be bored, use their imaginations, watch faces, respond to tone of voice, co-regulate with adults, right? And again, they give you tone and facial responses and things like that. And again, the brain's very sensitive, as we'll talk about as we move forward. And so it's important that we keep those things in mind. So the talk today is going to be really kind of neuroscience focused, but we'll kind of circle back to some parent strategies as well. We also know, so not only, and we'll talk a little bit about some behavioral changes that we see with excessive phone time or excessive screen time, but there are actually neuroimaging findings. So a very large scale systematic review in 2026 found that there are changes of the brain that are notable based on how much screen time kids get at different points, right? So higher screen time can correlate with reduced white matter integrity, which means that those tracks that are critical for literacy, early literacy, can be affected. And then when we look at some of this long-term, longitudinally, we also know that more internet use also leads to some smaller increases in white matter volume, which means that these brains are not developing those neural inputs and connections the way that we want them to, right? Again, I talked about how screens are two-dimensional. They're also fast-paced. Nobody gets bored. You don't have to be particularly creative. It requires very little physical movement and provides instant gratification, right? So when these things are happening and we're asking these kids' brains to figure out how to regulate emotions and increase frustration tolerance and develop imaginative play, these screens are not allowing kids to make those developmental steps that they need to if their screen time is too excessive, right? So again, as I said before, the concern isn't always screen exposure alone, but it's what are screens replacing? Are they replacing social skills integration? Verbal and emotional reciprocity, that back and forth of communication. Is it affecting sleep? And this next slide is going to talk about that just a little bit. Next slide, please. Okay, and next slide after this. Okay, so this slide talks a little bit about screen time and its effect on the sleep and developing brain, as well as mood as well. And what we're talking about here is that there is actually some changes with sleep architecture. So we're not just talking about too much blue light right before sleep can affect the ability to fall asleep, but actually the integrity of those neural pathways are not enforced as much during sleep if there's too much screen time during the day. And we know that long-term this can also have a direct impact on mood and increase depressive symptoms in preteens over time. So in 2025, there was a study of 976 children that found that if kids consistently went over the screen time recommendation of 1 to 2 hours a day of recreational phone use or technology use, that there was a huge increase in depressive symptoms that were experienced by the age of 10 to 13. So what that means is that early on in the tween years, if there was high use of technology, that led to more, or there was a correlation between that and increased rates of depressive symptoms later on, right? So this is looking at longer term data. However, again, by the way, it was thought to be mediated through these negative associations with sleep. So shorter sleep cycles and more chaotic organization of white matter synapses. But this is target, this is modifiable, right? We can really focus on making sure that sleep is as consistent as possible, and we can make changes with the type of screen time kids are experiencing, as well as the amount of screen time that they are experiencing. We also know that very specific types of screen time with different age groups can have some developmental risk, right? So early introduction of social media can increase rates of depression and self-injury. And this is looking at a 2026 meta-analysis of 153 longitudinal studies, right? So this isn't small, populations that we're studying. We're studying huge populations. And these are outcomes that were found time and time again, right? So the social media piece, video games have been linked to higher rates of aggression and externalizing more explosive behaviors, less emotional regulation. And just in general, early and excessive use of smartphones can increase odds of depression and anxiety in youth threefold. Now, again, I went pretty heavy into the bad and the ugly. What is important to take away is that again, there is a lot that we can do to mitigate this. So there is a dose effect here. So what's considered kind of a safe time period for 13-year-olds in a 2026 study is about 2 hours a day of screen time that's more passive. Greater than 2 hours a day, then we start getting into elevated risk of difficulty with sleep, and then if we get into really excessive or high risk periods of time that kids are on unsupervised screen time, then we have very high odds of depression in teenagers. Next slide. And then again, I feel like I'm belaboring the point here, but early milestones are affected. So a delay in communication and in skills of daily living by age 4 with more than an hour of screen time a day. Executive functioning, which is that ability to plan out tasks and execute tasks. So higher screen time in our school-aged kids can contribute to poor executive functioning ability. And then in adolescence, we actually find that there is cognitive performance impairment in addition to risk of mood and anxiety factors. Now, again, as I talked about, let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that we can use digital media in a way that is not as scary and grim as I mentioned, right? So certainly talking about interactive content. So ways that the slide isn't talking about this, but talking with grandma long distance and staying connected with family through Skype or Zoom or something like that is important. I would say even, following the pandemic, having access to mental health services, even if it's through telehealth, is extremely important. And having short doses of high quality educational programs, such as PBS Kids or Sesame Street Workshop, things like that. Again, using if we're going to use technology, let's do it in a very mindful way. Structured gaming, again, for maybe older kids, working on spatial awareness, manipulating objects in a simulated 3D type model. Things like that can help with some working memory, spatial awareness, and fine motor coordination. And then again, we talked about that bi-directional interaction through video, video chatting and things like that. Now, again, I promised that we were going to get into some of the good news, and Christa is going to go into this a little bit more, but there are lots of things we can do to mitigate the effects of technology, right? Technology is here to stay. Right? Our kids are going to be exposed to lots of different technology in lots of different ways. So what can we do to mitigate some of these things that I talked about that could be potentially poor outcomes? So we talked about limiting being mindful of the types of activities that kids are engaging in, but also prioritizing being outside. So, frequent outdoor play decreases 18% of the negative link between screens and early developmental concerns, right? So if you're concerned that, grandma and grandpa don't have the energy that they once did, and, you're relying on them for some childcare, and yes, there is technology involved in some of that, babysitting. You know what? When you pick up the kiddo from grandma and grandpa's, take them outside, do some green time, not screen time, green time, and so being outdoors can have a really positive effect psychologically as well as developmentally, and being physically active again can be incredibly protective against some of the things that I talked about. Now back to the bad and the ugly. Let's talk about red flags, so signs of problematic use. So really, when we're talking about screen time, we want to think about the screens as potentially being dysregulating, right? So we're looking at our kids, we're looking to see what their behavior is, right? So asking kids to do a big ask after having a long period of time where they're gaming or they're scrolling on Instagram or something like that is going to be really tough, right? So sometimes doing the ask before the relax time, right? But the AAP defines problematic use as risky, excessive, or impulsive use on social media. And they estimate between 7 to 10% of youth with exposures can have some signs of problematic use. Device dependence. So we do talk about those dopamine hits can be particularly intoxicating to the brain, so to speak, right? And some of the signs that our kids have become dependent on devices is they're preoccupied, right? How can I get it? When can I get it? How long can I have it? Really struggling with the turning off of device, mood alterations, withdrawal, declining grades. Those things are all things to keep in mind and make sure that we're looking out for. So now Christa's going to talk about some of the parenting strategies that we can use to help set some of those boundaries.
Yeah, that was a lot, and it was great data. And I think that, it's not all doom and gloom, but it is important to understand that the negative impacts are real. And I think that's probably why we have so many people here tonight interested in this topic, because we know that this is real, and we know that this is something that we all need to be concerned about. And so I think that, the data, while sobering at times, is also a wake-up call for a lot of us. And to Erin's point, there are things we can do proactively to help our kids navigate the digital world, because it's not going away, but navigate it in a way that is healthy and age appropriate, and guarantees that they are developing and hitting their developmental milestones the way we want them to. I want to just make sure, when I introduced myself, I forgot to mention that I am also the parent of two kiddos. My kids are grown though. I have a almost 20-year-old. He's going to be a junior in college starting in the fall. And then I have an adult daughter who graduated from college a year ago and is now out on her own, working in the real world, as we like to say. And in fact, if you hear some rumbling and bumbling behind me, it's because I'm watching that said daughter's dog while she's on a business trip right now. So he was currently, I'm not used to having a pet underfoot, so I might have to look away for a second while I tend to the dog. But to Erin's point, my kids were in high school and middle school when the pandemic hit, and then in college post-pandemic, and high school post-pandemic, but really navigating more the social media side. I say that to say that, when my kids were younger, digital screens and media were not as prevalent as they are for a lot of your children. So, but I also am in clinical private practice, and we have four clinicians at my practice, and we see kids, families, teens, and adults. And so we navigate this issue really for all ages. I mean, I actually, with my adult clients, I am constantly reminding people who are in difficult headspaces that the very first thing that we can do to support our positive mental health is to get off social media, right? We know that sometimes a trip down the Facebook scrolling rabbit hole can really impact our mood, right? And if we know that it's happening for us, we can pretty much guarantee it's happening for our kids, right? So as Erin said, there's some strategies we can use this summer. In the summer, we have a little more unstructured time, which is great, and also challenging, right? Because we know our kids are going to have some more free time during the day to say, can I have my tablet? Can I have my iPad? Can I play on my phone or on your phone? So what are some of the things that we can do to do that? Well, one of the first things we talk about is having a family media plan, which basically means that we're all sitting down as a family and saying, here are the rules for all of us. Because there's nothing worse than when you're confronted, and I've had this happen personally, where you say to your kids, get off your phone, and they're like, well, you're on your phone, and you go, yeah, you're actually right. I am on my phone, and that, good catch, bud. So a family media plan means we're all invested in limiting and managing how much time we're using technology, right? And that we're balancing the utilization of technology with some of the other fun family things that we can be doing, whether it's playing in the yard or I used to say to my kids, it's field trip Friday. So definitely in the summer, we always did something fun on Fridays if we could swing it, whether that was a trip to a little water park or even just a movie. But whatever we're doing as a family or as individuals in that family, we want our kids to see us mitigating our technology use in an intentional way, modeling that for them. Time boundaries, I think this is obviously something most of us already do, right? We're really trying to limit, and Erin's data was pretty clear that the older we get, the more we can tolerate, right? So littles, I always said to my kids, little dinner, little dessert, big dinner, big dessert. Little kid problems, big kid problems. So things scale with kids, right? That's the same for the time that we're going to be using our social media or our screens and digital technology with our kids. So little kids, little exposure. And to Erin's point, exposure with our little guys, especially I'm saying our 5 and unders, hopefully those are interactive activities, some of the more fun things and using those in a family format. So maybe, you're sitting with your child and playing an educational game, or you're helping them as they're drawing a picture on their iPad. So, making sure that and being clear about communicating what those time boundaries are and you're going to have to reiterate it over and over again with your kids. Remember, it's you've got your hour, bud, and do you want to use your hour in the morning, or do you want to use your hour in the afternoon, or do you want to break it up into two sections? This may sound either out of reach for some people, and I'm looking forward to getting to this question and answer piece of this presentation so we can really dig into what people are actually experiencing on the ground. But I had a client in today who's got a 4-year-old. And she said that it used to be in the morning, she would let her son play on his iPad. He's 4, while she was making breakfast and lunch for the day. And she started to notice that his mood was really tanking, that by the time they got in the car on their way to school, he was fussy, he was disengaged. So she realized of her own volition, I think I need to limit the screens and push that screen time to the afternoon. And so she's had to kind of change their format. And she said it was hard at first. There was a lot of whining and fussing and asking, when can I have my iPad? When can I have my iPad? And now, she just kept saying over and over again, not in the morning, this afternoon. And so now he says, is it afternoon yet? And she says, no, well, it's lunchtime, but it's not afternoon. He goes, is it early afternoon or late afternoon? And she says, late afternoon. So, that's reiterating it over and over again. And she said she's noticed an incredibly positive uptick in his mood in the morning. And even her husband noticed, wow, he's a lot easier to get out the door now that we're not fighting with him to pull the iPad away. So establishing those time boundaries and then being clear and communicating them early and often to your children. And you're going to sound like a broken record, and it's going to be frustrating. But communicating that clearly so everyone is clear about it. And you can also say, remember, I'm limiting my phone time too. We're all in this together. Screen free zones, definitely. We like we recommend at Betty Center that all of our clients have their kiddos and teens put their phone on a charger in a family room, whether it's the living room, the kitchen, whatever, but no screens in the bedroom. Definitely. And if you can do it, yes, definitely an hour before bedtime. We really would like to have that screen time eliminated. And that PS, by the way, is something I'm working on personally for myself. I know for sure that I do better when I don't scroll on my phone before I go to bed at night. And it is a hard habit to break. So I feel your pain in terms of trying to manage this for your kiddos, because we're all trying to manage it, I think, for ourselves too. Because we all see the data and the research. How many times do we see, that you don't want that blue light on your, you know, like activating your brain before you go to sleep. And it's like, yeah, but one more scroll. Or like for me, it's like, let me just play the Wordle real quick. So really trying to be clear about those screen-free times. And again, it's going to be struggle. I'm going to get into, I'm not suggesting any of this is easy, but it is important. I love the way we have this one sort of crowding in other activities. Again, we're trying to have a dose of social media balanced with lots of doses of other fun stuff, whether it's outdoor play, coloring, digging in the dirt, digging in the garden. One of the things that we like to do with our clients who have kids and teens, especially elementary and middle school kids, is coming up with a project and then following the project through from start to finish. So in other words, you could say to your middle schooler, you might say, what do you want to do? What are some things you really want to do this summer? Well, I'd really like to learn how to bake cupcakes. Okay, well, cool. What do we need to do to learn how to bake cupcakes? Well, I guess we need to open the cabinet and get some flour and whatever. It's like, oh, actually, you know what? Let's start at the beginning. First thing we need to do is find a recipe. Where can we find a recipe? Well, we can look on Pinterest, or what we could do is we could go um, to Barnes and Noble together, and we could browse the aisles of Barnes and Noble. So suddenly we have established a whole fun set of activities that we're doing start to finish. So we're deciding that we're going to go to Barnes and Noble, and then we're going to go to Barnes and Noble. We're going to look for a cookbook or a cookbook that maybe one of your kids' friends has, or a recommendation that another mom or family member has suggested that would be a great, cookbook that you want. And then you get the book, and then you bring it home, and you say, okay, we're going to look through the cookbook and find the best cupcake recipe. And you let your middle schooler or elementary school, oh, I really like this one with Oreos. So then you help them make the list of everything that goes into that cupcake. And before you know it, you've got yourself, 4 or 5 different field trip activities that you're doing, to go to the grocery store to buy the items. You could even, I love the Amish market because there's so many fun things to look at and see in the Amish market. You take the kids there and buy some, lots of all the different sprinkles. I mean, you get the idea, right? Being creative about really drawing out the process and allowing your kids to be part of that. So that's a great idea around sort of building up more things to do to really keep your kids busy and engaged in activities that are not screen dependent. This one's tough, protecting sleep, no devices in the bedroom. This is a big one. I have so many clients whose kids have had to basically have their phones pulled out of their bedrooms. I'm sure many of you wouldn't be surprised to know that there are a lot of kids who do go to sleep with their phones, and they're on those phones all night, and it's really, really, it can be super damaging, right? We don't want that. So definitely making sure that those phones go, or tablets go on a charger in a family, in view of parents and caregivers. again, when we do, again, not all tech is bad. Some of it's good. And obviously, we know our kids are being raised in a digital society. So we do want to prepare them for how they're going to use digital media or digital technology. So what can we do to do that? Can we sit with them together on the couch and, work together on whether it's playing the Wordle. I still actually play the Wordle with my 20-year-old son. We go back and forth on it every day, which is a kind of fun. By the way, he always gets it before me, which is also very annoying. Um, but that be that as it may, it's a great opportunity for the two of us to engage while still using our screens. And then, of course, those good old parental controls. We know those are good. Our kids are going to rail against them. They're going to be mad. They're not going to like it. And they're going to, the older they get, the more they're going to find workarounds to get around those parental controls. It's just the way of the world. So we as parents have to kind of stay one step ahead of the kids on those ideas there. Again, just developmentally, just to reiterate, our littles, we really just want to limit the screen time and technology used to 1 hour a day or less, and making sure that we're with them when they're accessing those screens. Our elementary school kiddos, definitely this one, the no screens in the bedroom, that's a big one. I really can't emphasize that one enough. It's a really easy habit to get into and a very hard habit to break. So if you can not set the precedent, it's easier than setting it and then having to take it away. It's not impossible to take it away because I have had plenty of families who have been able to do it. But it's a little more painful for all of us when we have to do that. And I can walk you through what that looks like if you need support and guidance on that. So again, as Erin said, none of this is irreversible. It's not irreversible on brain development. It's also not irreversible if we've created some family habits or patterns that need to be tweaked a little bit. It's okay. We can still do it. Our middle schoolers, these guys are tough. The social media access is real. When can I have it? When can I have it? When can I have it? Everybody else has it. Why can't I have it? This one is tough, right? So these are we'll get into it in another slide about how do you manage that nagging and that and being mindful of the fact that our kids really do want to fit in. There are going to be families who are going to have their kids on some of these apps sooner than some of us are going to allow our kids to be able to be on that. And that does cause a digital divide, so to speak, socially. How do we navigate that? Having conversations about that is really important, and we'll get into that. But I just want to acknowledge for you, I understand that it is a real thing. It's a very difficult thing when the next door neighbor, and sometimes it might be a friend of yours. I mean, you might be in a group of moms and everyone's on the same page about all these things. Then all of a sudden, one of the moms goes rogue and decides her kid can have Snapchat, and then it's like two other moms allow it, and now suddenly like you're the bad guy that has, do I cave? Do I not cave? These are all real difficult decisions. And we want our kids to have good social, connections. We also want to be mindful of the internet, the dangers of the internet, and what's waiting for our kids out there if we're not keeping track of things. Our teens, this is where the conversations continue about, really ramp up about safety. Again, the screen free bedtime stuff, it gets real tough in high school. I dealt with this myself. My kids used to always say, wow, how am I going to wake up if I can't have my phone in my room? I'm like, there's this thing called an alarm clock, and they just couldn't get their heads around that. They just thought, if I don't have my phone, I don't know what time it is, I'm not going to be able to wake up. And so it's a tough one. But it does need to be enforced, especially in the teenage years, because there's just too much temptation and not enough safety breaks out there for our kids to be exposed to. So, here we are talking about technofurence. So again, that's sort of what I said to earlier when my kids said to me, Mom, you're on your phone. I was like, yeah, you are right about that. And I am going to work on that. And then we talked about it. And I was constantly saying, see this? I'm going to put it down now, and I had to be very mindful of it. And if you can do it, so, when you listen, it's kind of like saying to your kids, hey, we're all in this together. We're all going to put our phones on the chargers tonight, and it's going to be hard for all of us, right? And we're all going to do it together. And then maybe we're all going to go get a popsicle or an ice cream and be like, okay, that was hard. And so really, encouraging the all in, we're all in this together mindset, I think can be really helpful. One of the things that we talk about a lot at Betty Center is family, sort of family unity, right? So like having conversations with your kids as a family about what are our values as a family? What's important to us as a family? And then having that language that you can teach your kids around in our family, right? In our family, we're not allowed to, or in our family, we always, right? So and there's nothing more satisfying as a parent. Again, my kids are older, so I can tell you, you will get to the other side of this. And then the first time you hear your kids say, in our family, we always have, Sunday dinner, you'll think to yourself, I think I maybe did it, right? So in our family, and I have a lot of strategies for how we can create, I have a lot of my clients and families doing family crests that they might put on the refrigerator with all the different things that are important to you as a family. And again, when I say family, I mean whoever is in your family, whether it's grandma, mom, and kids, whether it's mom and kids, which is what it was in my case, because I was a single mom. So I had my kids, but they also, I was divorced, so they went to their dad's house. So that was a whole extra layer of navigating tech. But having a family identity helps us do this kind of thing, monitoring and mitigating the screen time and letting your kids know we're all working on this together. And it's not easy, and we're going to get through it together. Um, so this one I like to call the but why, right? But why? Why can't I? Why are you saying this? This is so unfair. One of the things that people hear me say early and often, always in all of my therapy sessions with my young adult clients, and my adult clients, my geriatric clients. I don't see kids anymore, but I see those other populations. And what I always say is we cannot move people to problem solving until they feel validated. It is impossible to move people to problem solving until they feel validated. What that means is it doesn't necessarily mean we agree, but we have to let our people, whether that's our kids or our spouse or our boss or the person that works with us or the lady at the grocery store, humans want to feel validated and heard. So when our kids and they're going to say, this is unfair, I'm so mad, I feel I'm so mad at you. I feel left out. I don't know how I'm going to get through fill in the blank. Sixth grade, fifth grade, seventh grade, 12th grade without fill in the blank. The app, the social media, a phone, whatever, right? Every age brings a whole new level of, I feel socially left out. If you don't tell your kid, I get it, I understand what that means for you, they will not hear anything else you have to say. So we first have to absolutely positively validate that what we are trying to teach our kids in this digital world is difficult. It is difficult, and we understand the struggle. Okay. So it doesn't mean that so right there, so let's imagine your kid comes to you and you say, listen, first rule, I went to this training tonight and, I think we're going to work on, moving phones out of the bedroom, be prepared for shrieking and horror and, people upset, and everyone's going to need to take a breath, and you're going to be like, yeah, it's rough. It is rough. So first validate. And I say that because that is true for every interaction and every relationship that we have as humans. And I can tell you as a therapist that when people don't feel that validated, power struggles in families or in relationships, in marriages can go on for years. And people have the same argument over and over and over and over again. You know why? Because their spouse or their parent or their kid didn't say, I understand what you're saying. So that's number one. Number two, no negotiation. So, yes, you're right. This is a struggle. Yes, it is unfair. Yes, it is a bummer. It's going to be painful. And the answer is no. Okay. So that's it. Be clear but firm and leave no room for debate. Okay. Remember, our kids have to learn to tolerate the word no. Our job as their parents and their caregivers is to teach them to tolerate the word no. That is how we send them out into the world as great, productive members of the society. If we do not teach them that, they cannot become productive members of the community. They can't. And so we validate their disappointment, we join them in their frustration, but we do not give in on the rule. The rule is the rule. And we're going to teach them to tolerate the discomfort of that rule. So the third rule, third list here, third thing on the list here is comfort and connect, right? So when our kids are disappointed, angry, frustrated with any boundary that we've set, whether it's around technology or whether it's around you can't have dessert or whether it's because you have to be home before by curfew, yeah, acknowledge their feelings, first validate, and then comfort them as they process it. So let's use those moments for connection rather than argument, right? And then keep returning back, right? So connection and comfort is the way that we build relationship with our kids because the world is frustrating. The world is one big no, as I like to say. The world is one big no. We send our kids out into the world and they're going to hear no all the time. No, you can't drive 65 in a 50. You're going to get a ticket. No, you can't steal from the grocery store. You're going to get arrested. The no's keep getting bigger. But in our job in our homes is to teach our kids to tolerate the no's so they can tolerate the big no's of the world. I'm not suggesting this is easy, but it is our job, as parents. How do we do this successfully? Well, this is where our tribe comes in. Okay. Community is how we help. We know as parents, we can't parent in isolation, right? How do we get through all of these ups and downs with our kiddos? Through our community, right? Through our neighbors, our friends, our family friends, our people at church, wherever we're finding our community, we're gonna really connect up with those people. So when our kids come to us with the inevitable, everyone else is allowed to. You can say, yeah, that's hard, right? Before you say, no, they don't. That's not true. So and so's not allowed to do either. Like, nope. That might be true, but they don't want to hear that right then. What they want to hear is, yeah, I get it, bud. You're right. It does feel like everyone else can do that. That's your first validate. If you can, we like the idea of connecting with like-minded families, right? So, and you probably are already all doing this, but I'll reiterate the obvious. Share these frustrations with the other families that your neighbors, your friends, the families at school. And see if you can identify like-minded parents and caregivers that kind of view these rules the same way that you do. It doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but if you can, because we know that when your seventh grade girl is the only one that doesn't have a phone, um, you know, she's going to be left out, right? So how do we manage that? Well, a couple ways. Maybe we look at ways to give her access in other ways. Can she access one app, not on a phone, but on an iPad that's with that and she has to use it in the living room so she can still connect with the other kiddos. But if it's also helpful to see if you can find families that share the same values as you, it's easier to have a tribe where everyone's kind of on the same page. The third one is teach your kids to blame you. This is a fabulous one. You do this isn't just for tech. This is for everything. Just make sure you tell your kids, just tell them it's my fault. Just say my mom said no, my dad said no, my grandma said no, my aunt said no. And you can, so just tell them like blame it on me. And then they can be mad at you about it. And you can be like, yep, I'm the bad guy. Which leads us to number 4. I call this one establishing the ownership hierarchy. Okay. So at the end of the day, all these devices that we're talking about, they're yours. They're not your kids. They're yours. At the end of the day, yes, we have guilt about taking things away, but when our kids don't comply with the family media plan or they got caught, on screen time when they were supposed to be doing something else, remove. And again, no negotiation. Help them tolerate the no, help them tolerate the frustration, but my devices, my rules. Okay. Incremental social media use for teens. This is real. right? So we want to be clear about what apps can kids have, teens have, and at what age. This is where your tribe comes in. This is where you sit around with a couple of the other dads or moms in your neighborhood and be like, okay, we got eighth graders here. Let's talk about WhatsApp, or let's talk about Snapchat. How do we all feel about Snapchat? And then you can, and you can, um, it's better if you can do this in a bit of a community setting so that everyone, or, as many of you as possible are on the same page. And again, I'm not saying it's not going to be perfect, but the more you can identify people that have the same sort of big picture values as you, the easier this will be. Um, and then, of course, these other ones are just basic, parenting guidelines from a mom who's on the other end of it. But, parent first, right? My former father-in-law used to always say, I don't have any 15-year-old friends and I don't want any. And that's because at the end of the day, kids need us to be their parents, not their friends, right? And remember that anxiety goes down when kids believe we, as the adults, are in charge, even when they complain about it. Anxiety goes up when they don't feel that we are in charge. Anxiety goes down when they do feel that we are in charge. It's just facts. And trust your instincts. Our children need us to be authentically ourselves, right? Free from comparison, self-doubt, or guilt. Um, these are just some resources that we will share with you. We have some one pager, and we'll be able to submit that to all of you. But these are some of the resources that Erin has for everyone to share. And there's more, but these are the ones that we think are the most helpful. So I think that's it for my piece.
All right. So Katie, if you can stop recording, we're going to open it up for questions.